Hi, everybody. Oh, Pharaoh, you're wearing sunglasses. Hi, Dr. Feldman. So we have a special guest today, which I'm really, really excited and thrilled about, which is not only Dr. Feldman and his son, who we can say hello to, but also to Giles. I don't even know your proper title.
Oh, don't worry. You don't want all of those. You don't want all of those.
It is something very fancy. Do you still go? Is it like President of the United States? Like once you have that title, you remain that? Are you still Canon Dean of St. Paul's?
No, I'm not the dean. I'm no, not of St. Paul's. No, but I'm a canon. I'm Reverend Canon Doctor. That's
Oh,
my title.
see that, guys. That's very, very impressive. Reverend Canon Doctor. People in Israel aspire to Rabbi Doctor, but Reverend Canon Doctor, it's much, much better. So this is just really exciting for me. Giles and I met. We have a which is me and Giles and a lord, a British lord, and a rabbi. Why I'm and also a Harvard Law student. Why I am actually included in that, I'm not really sure. But part of the benefit of this was I got to meet Giles. And we've had such really, really interesting conversations about many, many things, and a lot having to do with the issues that we talk about all the time, which is the relationship between different cultures and how in a modern world in which we exist, how people with different beliefs can talk to each other. Not only talk to each other, that's kind of the liberal default. And I think where Giles and I are probably more optimistic or idealistic is to go beyond. I mean, you have to start with the tolerance and the respect. That's the minimum. But then there is also the possibility of learning from others, right? And that requires a feeling of safety, meaning one has to feel safe enough in one's own identity and feel they're not being threatened by others in order to learn from others. That's what we spoke about a little last time. I was telling Giles that we had our night at the museum on Saturday night, and we talked about not only listening well, but telling your stories with kindness. Giles, this is one of my students' formulations. It just blew me away. To tell your story with kindness. And by telling your story with kindness, to leave room for other people to tell their stories.
Yeah, very nice.
Right? Because the emphasis is usually to be a good listener. But really, I think it probably starts with the way we identify ourselves in the world. And we're all familiar with people who are so insecure about their identity in whatever field, political, religious, or anything else, that they feel this necessity to say who they are. And that assertion of who they are is the exclusion, really comes at the exclusion of others. So Giles and I have been talking all about that. And we have been talking. Giles, I'll give just a couple of minutes just to introduce you and to what we're going to talk about. Is that okay?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah. No, so we've been really.
Am I supposed to be, Williams, can I just ask you one question? Am I supposed to be looking at the screen of an orchestra?
Right, sorry about that. You are supposed to be looking at the screen of an orchestra, but can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you, yeah.
You can see me, and here we also are just going to start. I mean, I put together a little, I was inspired, our students made videos for Dr. Feldman's class, and I was inspired by their technological expertise. So I tried to do it myself. Let's see. Shouldn't be so hard. Play from current slide. Right. So we'll talk about this set of sculptures in a minute. So we've been talking about from the beginning of term, really, the conflict between two value system, worldviews, sensibilities, which both come together to form the world that we live in. It's speaking in very broad terms. It's what an old professor of mine used to call a bumpkin history, but bumpkin histories can be useful. And that is to talk about the influence of these two worldviews. And we spoke about them in relationship to cities, Athens and Jerusalem. Now we have been focusing uniquely on Athens. In this course in America, at the university where I studied, they start with Jerusalem. They start with the Hebrew scriptures. But we move, because for many reasons, we move right into Athens. And now, really, we're after Virgil, and we get to the turn of the common era and the birth of Jesus and the beginning of Christianity. That is really the way Jerusalem comes back into the story of Western civilization. meaning it doesn't, the story of Jerusalem doesn't come back into Western civilization through the Jews. I mean, it does indirectly through Christianity, but it's really Christianity that brings Jerusalem into dialogue with Athens. And just maybe to start us out, this is a representation of ecclesia and synagogue, and it's in the Strasbourg Cathedral in France. Has anybody been there? It's a pretty amazing experience, and this is still the originals have been taken out of the church and they're put in a museum across the street. So maybe we could just start out and together think about this representation. What do you make of this representation of ecclesia on the left and synagogue on the right? That is, what relationship is being asserted between these two religions? Of course, this is from the, I don't know, Daniel, from the 12th century, the 13th century? 13th century probably, right? This is probably from the 13th century. And already the Catholic Church is triumphant, and Giles will tell us a little bit more about that. He's not in the Catholic Church, he's an Anglican, and maybe, we hope he'll tell us a little bit about that. But this is in a cathedral in Strasbourg, the representation of church and synagogue. So we practiced on Saturday night, reading images. So how do we read these sets of images?
One blind, is or their eyes are covered.
So right, so synagogue's eyes are covered. And what else about her?
She's looking down rather than looking up.
And what is that, Sondas, what does that express for you, that looking downward?
Humiliation, I think.
Yeah.
You're going to say, you're going to go right to humiliation? You're going to go right there?
Something.
What, Sondas?
The one on the left seemed more confident in herself.
Well, certainly. I mean, that image we do have on the left side, the sisters, it seems like, of Christianity and Judaism. I don't know. I was going to hold short a little bit of humiliation and say really despondency, maybe. I don't know. I mean, it depends how you want to look at it, how you want to read it. What else is distinctive?
The objects that they're holding.
Okay, go ahead with that, Yuval. What do you mean? So what about the objects?
Well, one is holding the cross as a staff and a cup, while the other has something that represents an arrow, I think, and something I can't recognize in her hand.
I don't really,
I mean, it's a scroll.
Well, so wait, one second. This is a scroll?
No, the other thing.
Oh, the other thing is a scroll or a book. Yeah. Okay, right. So she does seem to be holding something associated with a written word. And she is holding this cross upright, triumphant. She's despondent. This spear that she has is broken, meaning any strength that was associated with her is now broken. And then there's this chalice. I mean, maybe Giles can tell us more about how that would function here. Of course, the crown as well. So on the one hand, we have this sense of the church triumphant over the Jews. I mean, I don't think that reading is avoidable. But there's another part of it, and I think this is what Giles will start at least to talk with us today about, is that they're still sisters. They're still related one to another. And really the question is, and this goes back to that broader question, is how do different religions deal with each other today? And the question, and the reason I really wanted Giles to come today is to talk about really the relationship of Christianity to its predecessor, which is a reason I put this set of images up here. And I hope also, Giles, really, I hope you'll really, tell us whatever you feel like telling us. I mean, I'm also really hoping that we'll get a chance to read one of the Gospels or a part or a story or something with you. One of the things that's true about all the people in the reading group that we have is that, and I'll include myself in it, that we're all kind of fearless readers. And by fearless, I mean not afraid to confront the text as it talks to you. And that's what we're trying to learn together here. to be fearless. It's hard to do that. I was not fearless as an undergraduate, but you learn the skills to really make yourself present. And Giles makes himself present really to everything. I imagine he's a fantastic congregational priest because he works so hard in every way to make himself present in the conversations that I've had, but also he's a very present reader. So Giles, please take it away and tell me if there are any texts that you want to show. I have the Revised Standard of all the gospel of the synoptic gospels up, so you can signal me about what you want to see or talk about or whatever. I am at your service.
Well, first of all, can I just say, William, thank you for inviting me to do this, and what a delight it is. It's a particular delight to be virtually talking to people at Ramat University, at Bar Ilan University, only because I have family in Ramat Gan, and I know the area quite well, and that's because my wife is Israeli, was brought up there in Tel Ganim, and my boys are our kids are Jewish and being brought up as Jewish. So I'm in the these conversations are not purely academic for me. So what happens in my household is the coming together of I wouldn't say these two images, because these two images are pretty damning images that you have before you. But the relationship between Christianity and Judaism.
I don't see that. I don't see them as that damning. I mean, they are still related. They're still related one to another.
They absolutely are still related. Yeah. But the clearly this is an image taken at the height of Christianity's power and sort of global European confidence, and it's unashamed in asserting its superiority and the blindness of Judaism and those who are unable to see, which is what's being said here. They're friends. They're more than friends. Jews are more than friends. They're relatives, but they're unable to see. That's what's being said here. They're unable to see the truth. Now, how do we get to this stage from, and this is a long way after Jesus was born, when the word Christianity didn't exist in Jesus's time. He'd never heard the word. Christianity is a very strange religion insofar as it's got to be the one, perhaps it's the only religion in the world where the person at the center of it wasn't a member of the religion that it promotes. It's a very strange business. So
what do you mean, Giles? What do you?
Jesus wasn't a Christian. This is it's very hard to. It would be very hard to. He was Jewish. He was, and the religion that he participated in was first century temple going Judaism. Like many others, he had lots of criticisms of the sort of temple establishment, but he was a temple-going Jew. His followers were, for the most part, and certainly in the first instance, temple-going Jews. And the one way of really trying to sort of understand, as it were, original Christianity, you must bracket out, of course, the fact that all references to original have themselves to be critiqued, of course. But original Christianity isn't Christianity. It's a sort of, as it were, it's a heretical form of Judaism. And it is that for quite a long time. And if you really want to understand that sort of original Christianity, and a lot from the Gospels, it's probably worth, I was saying this to William yesterday, actually, it's probably worth really seeing it as a sort of like Isaiah on steroids. There's very little that's new in the New Testament, very little that's new in the New Testament. And the New Testament is actually often at great pains to say that there's nothing much new going on here, apart from the fact, and this is the big thing, apart from the fact that it believes that the messianic expectation has been realized. Now, when you take that leap, then all sorts of other things happen. But that's the big difference And it takes a while for Gentiles to gather around this idea. And then there's a huge, great big row within what comes to be called Christianity about whether it's really a sort of Gentile-led thing or it's a Jewish-led thing. And that row eventually moves more and more as Gentiles become more powerful within this movement, becomes more and more towards the Gentile side. But originally,
well, wait, Giles, by that you mean it becomes more universal when you talk about the Gentile side? That is,
first of all, it becomes more universalist. That's absolutely true, particularly with St. Paul's teaching. But also, simply numerically, it becomes more dominated by those who don't have a Jewish background, those who come from different parts of the Roman Empire. And so the sort of original insistence that those who followed this person that they believed to be the Messiah, the original insistence that they were, temple-going Jews who kept kosher, who were consider themselves, whatever we mean by Orthodox, because it's not the right term for the first century, but you know what I mean. That's how they would have seen themselves, and that's what they thought. That's what they thought this movement was. It was a Jewish movement. And if you look at, for instance, the Gospels, these are different accounts written from different perspectives. The Gospel of Matthew, for instance, which was written by someone who's Jewish, would have been absolutely clear that all parts of the law should be kept. And there's a line that's absolutely crucial in Matthew's Gospel in this regard, which is Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, where the author of Matthew's Gospel goes, not one jot or tittle of the law will be done away with. The law has not been abandoned. The law has been fulfilled. So that's what a lot of early so-called Christians would have thought themselves to be doing. And in this regard, they're not a million miles away from other, as it were, fringe or breakaway groups to temple worship in the first century. They're not a million miles away from the Essenes, but of course the Essenes and what happens at Qumran and that group, as it were, dies out, doesn't become particularly powerful, and so it's easier in retrospect to look back and say, yes, they were sort of weird sorts of Jews. But be Christian.
Wait, so Giles, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Yes.
just maybe if you could, I mean, I don't know if we have the breadth of knowledge about what's happening during this period and the going on between different, and really it is a time of enormous flourishing of differences. And then maybe let's talk about the first question first.
Sorry, mate, we had a little bit of an issue with the Wi-Fi there. Can you say it again?
Oh, is that me? That was me, I think. Okay, so no, I was asking you first.
We can't hear you, Professor Kohlbrenner.
You're going in and out, William. Can people hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
While William gets his, why don't, instead of this silence, whilst William gets his Wi-Fi sorted out, why don't I just pick up on what I think he might have been asking me, which is to say that during the first century of the Common Era, what we call first century Common Era, and centered around the temple, there are lots of very sort of different, divergent Jewish groups, which, you know, Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenes, and Christians are one of these sorts of groups. Some radical, some more conservative, and just as it probably it didn't make sense to talk about the Essenes as anything other than Jews. It probably doesn't make sense to talk about early Christians as anything other than Jews until, you know, certainly much later. Now that's quite hard for both Christians and Jews to do, because both groups have invested a lot from the sort of 3rd, 4th centuries. They've invested a lot as not being the other. And those people who thought of themselves as both, and that would have been that's the original Christianity, as it were sort of squeezed out of the picture. So those Christians who kept on going to synagogue, or when the synagogue starts to develop, that they were sort of pushed out. And on the other side, those Christians who saw themselves as having deep Jewish roots, see that self-image was Jewish, they got pushed out as well. And they got pushed out because both groups came to invest very heavily in not being the other. But if you go back to 1st century, that sort of developing way of understanding identity has not really been established. So it's difficult to get for people. I often
Reverend Fraser, may
Yes,
I ask
hello.
you a question?
Yes, of course.
When would you say the turn of Messianic Judaism came about then? Because that would have been the type that are in between the two. They're between Judaism and the practices of Christianity.
Messianic Judaism is in a way it's a complicated phrase, because if we think about, if you're in Israel and you think about what Messianic Judaism means today, Messianic Judaism means a particular sort of Christian experience that's focused on proselytizing Jews. Now,
By proselytizing, you mean converting, Giles? Is that what you mean?
to Christianity. And there's something quite, I mean, I felt quite uncomfortable about Messianic Judaism in that form, in its proselytizing form. Now, that's a very different thing, even though the terminology that you use is probably accurate. It's Judaism that thought the Messiah had arrived. Now, actually, you know, something similar happens in all, you know, has often happened within Judaism itself. You know, messiahs have come and gone within Judaism, and maybe you describe them as Messianic Judaism. The interesting point of comparison, I would say, with early Christianity is with the Chabad and the Rebbe. So those parts of the Chabad-Lubavitcher movement in the late 20th century that thought that the Rebbe was the Messiah. Now, nobody thinks of, when you see the pictures of the Rebbe all around Tel Aviv and around Israel, you don't look at the Rebbe and think he's not Jewish. You may, if you're Orthodox, look at the Rebbe and think he was really wrong, and I have big issues with the sort of messianic theology of many of his followers, but you don't think he wasn't Jewish. I think that's probably fair. Now that would probably, that would be the sort of like the similar sort of thing to early Christianity. That's probably the nearest thing perhaps that we can get our heads around. So what happens later on is that the church comes to redescribe the sort of triumphant church that we saw in those two images, comes to redescribe early Christianity as Christian, but it was about as Christian as the Rebbe.
So Giles, since you're taking us back to that period, can you show us some things in the Gospels? Can you help us read some of them? Because we really are, and I have to just emphasize this. Most of us here in Israel and forgive me for saying this, are kind of parochial, meaning everybody lives in their own bubbles. And growing up in Israel, it's not like growing up for me in America, where you're a minority culture and you know about the religions of other cultures. Here, you tend to know about the religion which you practice. I mean, we're trying to do more of that together to understand each other, as much as it's challenging on Zoom. So our default level is pretty low. So maybe if you could take us, I mean, I have tons of questions for you about different texts.
Yes.
We've been talking about Midrash. What's your favorite parable?
Oh God, well, I'm a fan of the Good Samaritan, which I know is a bit corny as a parable.
Why is it? Which one of the Gospels is it in, Giles?
It's in Luke, and the Good Samaritan is a story about a man who was wandering from Jericho to Jerusalem, and as he was going up the hill, he gets attacked by robbers, and various people pass by and don't help him. So a priest passed by and doesn't help him. A Levite passes by and doesn't help him, and then a Samaritan passes by. Now, in terms of the Gospels, the Samaritan is the representative outsider. The Samaritan always comes up as the sort of the disliked other, and so this parable is a sort of fantastically challenging parable about how, you know, your own religious traditions, your own holy people, they didn't help. The people that are closest to you, that are us, didn't help. But the one who we have come to despise is the one who helped. Now that's
Giles, can we just go back? Can we just go back to just read a little bit of the context, and maybe you can help us out with this as well? Because here, the preceding story, you guys can hear me now? Yeah? The preceding story is Jesus revealing himself to his disciples as the Son. And Giles, tell me if I get this wrong. And behold, the lawyer stood up to him to the test, saying, oh no, so Jesus says, for I tell you that many prophets and kings desired to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it. Oh, we've been talking all term about seeing and hearing. And Jesus basically tells the people they don't know how to see and they don't know how to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is, as Giles already suggesting, Christianity is a revolution in reading. And behold, a lawyer stood up. What is this written in, first of all, Giles? What language is this written in?
Well, it's written in Greek. It's written in bad Greek. My brother, who is a classical Greek scholar and would be a representative of Athens rather than Jerusalem, looks at the sort of Greek that the New Testament was written in. It's called Koine Greek, and sneers. It's peasant Greek. So this is written as a sort of this is sort of peasant language. It's one of the few sort of perhaps the earliest biography, as it were, if that's the right word, written of someone who was not of noble birth.
So that's interesting on two levels. Then, on the one hand, there's this new genre called the Gospels, and we know four of them. Three are the synoptic Gospels: Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which are about the story of Jesus. That's what Giles is saying, that it's a kind of biography from three different perspectives. And I was going to go back. The other thing that's interesting about what Giles says is it's a peasant language, because this is really meant to be, we've used the term esoteric and exoteric in relationship to Plato. Well, if Plato is an esoteric thinker, then the religion of Christianity is very much exoteric, that it is a religion for the people. And we used the term before of a universal religion. And we'll see that as Christianity does develop, it really does think of itself as a universal religion in relationship to the more particularist aspect of Judaism. But I just want to read the story that Giles was referring to.
Just to comment on that slightly, William, as well. Even though it's more universal, as it comes to see itself as more universal rather than particular, it also doesn't sit terribly comfortably with philosophical universalism, and the sort of posh intellectuals, Plato and that sort of thing.
Wait, but Giles, I don't know if everybody knows what you mean by a posh intellectual. Itamar, I see you're enjoying that. What's a posh intellectual?
Well, so the sorts of within the Roman Empire, that there are the sort of high cultural self-understanding, those who have a sort of those who are in cultural positions of prominence will admire a certain sort of thinking, like classical thought, Plato, and so forth. They will look at this and they will sneer. They sneer. They think this is the language of the common man. It's not very sophisticated. It's not very clever, and it doesn't touch a lot of the sort of philosophical things that this sort of writing should do.
Is that what you would call part of the one second, Laura. Is that what you would call kind of the evangelical or the good news part of Christianity, that it's really for the common person? I mean, is the revolution of Christianity the revolution for the common man, in a sense?
Yeah, there is a part of that it prioritizes that it's a revolution from below, in one sense, but it's stubbornly non-philosophical. It becomes much more philosophical as Christianity breaks out of its particular homeland and starts to recommend itself to all these intellectuals. It starts to try and learn the language of Plato and Aristotle.
We've talked a little bit about that as well. Dvorah, did you want to ask? Somebody asked a question before? Ophira, yeah.
Me.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, it's really interesting for me too, because my father is a Dutch Protestant Christian and my mother is a Jewish Israeli. But, having said that, is it also because the peasant Greek language that you speak of, was that at the time the language that was spoken in the area of the Eastern Mediterranean? And is that why?
Well, no, I mean, I think they would have spoken Aramaic. That's probably what they would have spoken.
The written language,
Well, the written language. I mean, Greek had been the sort of a common language for, well, I guess since Alexander the Great, for quite a while. And it was of course a common language amongst Jews as well as these people that we call Christians. So lots of Jewish texts of this period were written.
Well, there is, as the story continues. There is, as the story continues, Giles. Maybe if you could just, this part I just wanted you to talk about a little bit. So, behold, a lawyer stood up. Is that a Pharisee? It's not translated as Pharisee.
That would often be translated as a Pharisee.
Okay, and a Pharisee, the Pharisees are the sect, as it were, the triumphant sect that became Rabbinic Judaism. So a lawyer stood up and put him to the test, saying, and we do see this conflict between Jesus and I mean, I guess Giles is emphasizing the extent to which, from this Christian perspective, the temple cult, as it were, had become corrupt. So they are the Pharisee here is the figure of a certain kind of lack of understanding. But we'll see. So a lawyer stood up and put him to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read?" I love that line. And he answered, well, some of us will know this one: "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might." Right? So there is the verse from the Shema. So it's very interesting. We talked about the relationship between the Christian and the Jewish text, and here the Christian text is pulling out and quoting the Jewish text. And then he said to him, "You have answered right. Do this, and you will live." But he, desiring to himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And then he gives this story. So Mary Giles, maybe just in the context to go back a little bit more slowly over this story, because I think we might have missed some of the emphases that you were making about the function of the other. Who is this Levite? What is the significance of the oil and the wine? All those questions. Just how do we read this story as a whole?
Well, I mean, the key thing to get is that who the Samaritan is and why the Samaritan is perceived, or why there would be an agreement between the lawyer and Jesus, a perceived sort of agreement that the Samaritan was somehow a figure of some suspicion. That and you'll know much better than people will do in my context, the sort of the history of the conflict between Samaritans and those returning from the exile and all those sorts of things. So long-standing animosity, as it were, between say the Jerusalem cult and those on up in Nablus, the Samaritans. So the Samaritan is this figure that you needs translating for people today. It would be the sort of the person who comes from another religion that you distrust, that you dislike, that from which nothing good comes. So if you have such an imaginative construction, read that into the words Samaritan. So who is my neighbor? This is a beginning of a sort of breakout of your neighbor is not just the person that you live next to. It's not just your own religious community. Your neighbor is also the person who is someone who you're challenged to think of your neighbor as also somebody who is a part of that other disliked community. And the interesting thing is not that you do good to them, but they do good to you. So the Samaritan helps you. The man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Sorry, I thought it was going up. So he's going down the hill, fell among robbers, and a priest, verse 31, priest go down the road, saw him pass by. I'm not getting into any sort of...
So a priest would be a priest would be a Kohen, right?
Yes. Yeah. So
Can I ask a question? Sorry.
yes.
Just what sort of relationship is being advocated here with the neighbor? Is it just seeing his common humanity, or even like accepting or thinking about his beliefs? Like, you get the question?
Well, it's I think probably humanity, actually. I think that's probably right. But it's not, this is in a parable form, so it's hard to squeeze out a sort of doctrinal position from it. So it's certainly a sort of challenge to, it's a challenge to a certain sort of prejudice, I guess, about who our neighbor is. That seems to be and the only reason it's my favorite is that it has such a, it challenges so much of, I mean, I'm a religious professional, so I'm cast in this story as the person who walks by without helping. So there is within this a sort of self-critical vigilance, which is, I think, extremely valuable. It's a self-critical vigilance. And that self-critical...
Giles, is that the way most people read this? I think that's a very idiosyncratic reading. I mean, I was just wondering. I mean, the robbers, fast upon the robbers comes the Kohen and the Levi, meaning, and it seems like they're in the same category, the Kohen, the Levi, the robbers, and it's the other, the outsider, the person who has no relationship to the temple at all, who helps. Right. I mean,
so it depends whether you so this is a problem. This is a problem then. So I think people would read this, Christians would read this as the priest and the Levite are us. Okay, this is us. This is what we do. Okay, so the robbers happen, and then someone of And this is the really interesting question about whether you see, how you read this would be how you see early Christianity. Do you see this as going, a priest and a Levite, i.e. the Jews, they did nothing? Or would you read this as going, we did nothing? Okay, we did nothing, but the hated Samaritan did do something. Now, that's going to be, that's a really interesting reading, because divergence. So if what I said before is right, even here with Luke, who is a Gentile, by the way, and so it's not from Matthew's community, but
Wait, so Matthew's writing for the Jews in particular, and Luke is writing for a more universal community.
Well, they haven't got to universal yet. They haven't.
Whatever, for a bigger community.
They're smaller community actually. Well, they're still smaller. I mean, the Gentile Jesus following is still probably, you know, when this is written, is still probably in a minority position. That they haven't. I'm hazarding a guess here, but they haven't numerically overtaken the Jewish Jesus following. So it's taking into that situation. And the second half of, so Luke, just the other thing to say about Luke's gospel is a funny thing. It has two parts. And the second part, written by Luke, is called the Book of Acts. And that has huge debates in there early on about some of these issues about whether we're Jews or not, issues about circumcision, all that sort of stuff. But that comes later. Here, the presumption is that the priest and the Levite is us, and the Samaritan is other. So it's very, very crucial to read this. If you think of, so if you think that the people who are writing this and talking about this are Christians, then you will go, oh God, they're damning the Jews and then bigging up the Samaritans. Whereas in fact, you know, the previous conversation, and William has rightly highlighted the importance of the previous conversation, they both agree what's at stake here. The law is at stake, and this is the law. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. We're all agreed upon that. So there is nothing in this bit on the screen. There's nothing in this bit on the screen that an Orthodox Jew might not agree with. There's no reference to Jesus. Let's just say there's that. There'd be nothing there. This might be a sort of radical text in a particular midrash on neighborliness.
That is true. I mean, I just would like, but there is still mention of the Trinity, and that's something we haven't talked about yet. That they're the three-person God of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. So that's there, and also, I mean, as sensitive just to the language that's being used, there is a sense, and Dr. Feldman was just pointing this out to me, that there is the abandonment of ritual purity for a higher form of purity. Meaning you leave the ritual purity of the temple, and I hear your reading of it, and from that point of view, it's a metaphor. But the vehicle of the metaphor, as we've been talking about, it has to be respected of this temple worship. And then I just wonder about line 37. Is the law still intact after verse 37? He said the one who showed mercy on him, and Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." I mean, there is a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which some of you may know, right, where the different Tanaim talk about. You know, if you had to reduce the law to one verse, what would it be? And there's an argument among them. And this is in a similar genre, I think. And you should know that they're contemporaneous. These are around the same time. But does the law really survive verse 37 there, Giles?
I mean, I think Luke would have been less bothered by that as a question. Okay, it's true. And it's also true that there is a tradition of temple purity criticism that is there in this, that would also not have been absent from other parts of first century Jewish experience. I mean, for goodness sake, I mean, you know, the prophets spend their lives having a go at, you know, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and, you know, Hosea and so on and so forth. And
you were telling me yesterday that Isaiah is the most quoted of all of the prophets in the Gospels.
Isaiah is the sort of Isaiah is what formats much of the way in which the Gospels think about the arrival of the Messiah. Not only his Isaiah's messianism, the whole sort of messianic expectation that
I have a question. I read this completely differently. I read it from two sides. One, the priest would not stop because priests are not allowed to be by the dead. So if it's a Kohen or a Levi, according to that, he's not allowed to be by the dead. And then I read it from another point of view that if it's Christianity, maybe there's trying to not propaganda people, but trying to tell them that the average person can also do good, that not only the priests and the high ones have the ability of doing good deeds, so too can the average man, the Samaritan. So I didn't see it as a bad remark on Kohanim or Levites, because they wouldn't have been able to anyways go near the dead. And I also saw it as a positive side for the average man to step up and be able to do a good duty. Maybe I read it wrong. I don't know.
No, I don't think you've read it too differently there, because I think there is definitely a poke being had at the priests and their inability to extend help in these circumstances. I think there is, because there is quite clearly a criticism of the way in which the sort of establishment of the priesthood and the temple have developed within a lot of these texts. There definitely is, especially in the Gentile ones.
Maybe just since we're talking about the emphasis on the common person, could you maybe take us through Matthew 5 and the Sermon on the Mount? Because I think many of us, we have heard of it and maybe know a little bit about it. So let's find Matthew 5.
Matthew, we're in a different kettle of fish now.
Okay, what kettle of fish are we in right now?
Well, so let's go to Matthew 5, and I'll show you. So go down. So this is Matthew chapter 5. It's probably the most, one of the most famous Christian texts in the Gospels. Now, I want you to go down and scroll down just a little bit till you get to verse 17 here. Okay, let's just do that bit, and then think not. This is Matthew, Jewish. You see, I really hesitate to use the word Christian to describe these texts. I mean, they come to be seen as use that word, but it's such a misleading word to understand what's going on here. Just be very careful. Have a little buzzer in the back of your head when you go from that image of the 12th century and then go back to this, because it's a very unhelpful lens in a way. So look here. Verse 17, think not that I have come to, this is Jesus apparently talking, think not I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill. And then he goes on to say, for truly I tell you, till heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law till all is accomplished. Nothing. That means keeping kosher. That means keeping Shabbat. That means going to temple worship. That means all of the commandments of the law stand. They stand. Now, that's true for Matthew. That's true for Matthew. It feels different elsewhere, but that's very true for Matthew. Now, if you go up, so Matthew will be thinking there is nothing here that contradicts the law. Not only that, not only is there nothing that contradicts the law, there is this is what the law points to. I mean, that's obviously the debate. But it's not about, as far as Matthew is concerned, it's not about the abandoning of the law. Now, if you go up a bit, I know we're reading this backwards, from verse 14, it's just going down the bottom of the screen. If those of you who are familiar with the United States, this verse 14 is one of the sort of most famous verses in American politics in a way. You're light of the world, a city set on a hill cannot be hid. This city set on a hill was famously, text was famously used to reference what America was to the rest of the world. But you know, what makes it famous, the Sermon on the Mount, and also it has to be said, Sermon on the Mount. Why is he going up a mountain? Well, he's going up a mountain because it's also a reference to Moses. So you go up a mountain, when you go up a mountain, you're a reference to Moses receiving the law. So this is as you in verse 17, it says the law doesn't change. So he's sort of reimagining what the law is, sort of poetic, midrashic redescription. Blessed are the poor. Now Matthew is if you look with Luke's version of this side by side, you'll see their politics comes to be revealed, because whereas Matthew goes, blessed are the poor in spirit, Luke, who's, as it were in modern terms, more of a lefty, goes, blessed are the poor. None of that in spirit nonsense. You don't get that in Luke. You just get blessed are the poor. Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, peacemakers, persecuted, and so forth. So I'm not sure that there's anything in any of that. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so men persecuted the prophets who were before you. The self-understanding of this text is straightforwardly Jewish. And that would be the case throughout Matthew's gospel. Now, the people like Matthew who wrote this ended up being the sort of minority report. It ended up being Gentiles like Luke who really started to sort of take over Christianity, and you know, and with the conversion of the Roman Empire to Christianity, by then pretty much Jewish Christianity, this idea that Christianity is a sort of Jewish heresy. I mean, I don't even think Matthew thought it was that heretical, by the way. Matthew's pretty conservative and Jewish. But I don't think there's very
Giles,
yes.
Just before we let you go at 3 or a little after that, maybe, can you maybe do other people have questions for Giles? I mean, one of the things I'm interested in is how this vision of Christianity influences your own practice today as a practicing priest and educator, and that's really, I think that's the reason I'm included in the group, is because rabbis, priests, and professors are all teachers, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, or if anybody else had some questions for you, that it would be great as well to hear them.
Well, just to answer that, I'm very happy to answer other questions. I think we often tell ourselves stories of our origins, where our origins are pure, that as it were, our origins are, we come from a place where things are clear and uncontested. And the truth is that so much of our faith grows out of areas where there is no original uncontested space. So that's one of the things that I take from this. I also take from it the fact that the relationship between Christianity and Judaism, which is alive in my own life, is one that there was something that happened before Christianity became powerful and dominant and anti-Semitic. There is a sort of a relationship to be understood before that, which is worth looking at before the relationship became as poisonous as it became. And I don't see the seeds of that poisonousness here yet. I think it comes when Christianity, having having become a sort of more of a Gentile phenomenon, then I think it takes the hand of the Roman Empire. It's a very, I mean, you've got to think this is a very odd business about the relationship between Christianity and Rome. Just to say this, the Romans, Jesus died on an instrument of Roman torture. Only the Romans were allowed to do it. The Romans killed him. And I mean, this is the sort of radical and offensive thing to say. This is an offensive thing to say. From one reading, the Romans killed him, and then within 300 years, they were putting the cross on their weapons, on their armor, on their shields. It's as it were as if they killed him, then stole his religion. Now that's a terribly offensive thing to say, I know, but I'd say it's a sort of like a full-on thing. It goes from being.
Are you really a priest, Giles?
Yes.
It's kind of like similar to what Hitler did with the swastika. He took it from I think it was the Chinese religion or something, and it was originally a sign of peace, and he flipped it and changed it into something else.
It's an appropriation of symbols.
I mean, it's a very
appropriation of symbolism.
It's certainly appropriation of symbolism. I mean, it's very strange. I do ask sometimes people who wear crosses around their neck, would they wear an electric chair around their neck? Because an electric chair is a symbol of violence and oppression, and the cross was intended by the Romans to be a symbol of violence and oppression. It's supposed to say to people, "Be scared, know your place." Now, it has layered meaning for Christians, but that's its original meaning. And just to say to people, "Would you wear a gold electric chair around your neck?" is a way of saying this symbol went from being a sort of hated symbol of the Roman Empire to being the sort of club badge of Christianity. What a weird thing that is. What a very weird thing that is. And a symbol of oppression for Jews, of course. So it's a very weird thing about how the meaning of these symbols indeed change.
Anybody else, guys? This is just so fascinating.
Yeah, so you don't wear crosses or have any images of crosses?
Oh, yes, definitely have images of crosses. I mean, I'm sitting in my church now. I could almost turn the computer around and show you it. Yes, there is. I just wouldn't wear it as jewelry. I think that the cross is as much a rebuke as it is a rebuke of human wickedness, as it is I don't like it as a club badge, a little pin badge that you have and saying, I'm a member of this. That I think is a very strange appropriation of the cross. Yeah, but yeah.
What about original sin, Giles?
I'm very, very big on original sin, but then we have to get to Augustine.
Really?
Oh yeah, no. I think original sin is one of the great liberating doctrines of Christianity. I mean, I don't think I would be a Christian without original sin. I love original sin.
Wait, so original sin is this idea that man is born intrinsically evil, and I just want to highlight for our students. Wait, let me just give you the cliche thing, and then you can correct me. That man is born inherently evil, and that most people look at original sin as like this horrible expression of the religious superego constantly hitting you over the head and saying that you're bad. But that's obviously not Giles's perspective.
The only word I take issue with is evil. It's not that human beings are born evil. It's that human beings are born broken. Original sin is very similar to what Freud talks about. Is that human beings have a sort of unable to fix themselves. We're not self-fixers, so we need something outside of ourselves to fix ourselves, and that's it's a bit like Alcoholics Anonymous. At the beginning of Alcoholics Anonymous, you go, "It is not within my power to sort myself out." So it's not being derogatory about human beings. It's saying that there is something about us that requires fixing. So it does invite, as Dr. Feldman says, it does invite grace. So it is the invitation to, or grace is its corollary. But we can't do that in 2 minutes without talking about the Great Saint Augustine, which is
that's next week. That's next week.
I have so many more questions now.
Something to do.
I don't know what your time is, but I'm happy to carry on this a bit.
Yeah, so let's have 2 more questions, Ophira and then Dvora, yeah?
Reverend Fraser, can you say a little bit more, because you said that Luke was a Gentile and Matthew a Jew, and can you say a little bit more about the various authors of the books of the New Testament and how, through what prism we should read them?
Yeah, they're all writing to different communities. I have to say I'm not an expert on the New Testament. This is not my expertise, but they're all writing to different communities. And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's generally conceived to be Mark is the earliest, is the shortest, and Matthew and Luke both take bits from Mark and take bits from other places as well, patch them all together. Sometimes they have stuff they disagree with, sometimes they have stuff that they agree with. And then John is a very different kettle of fish entirely, perhaps quite a lot later. Certainly in terms of the relationship between Christianity, as it were, and Judaism, it's a much more poisonous relationship by the time you get to John. You still get a sense that this is a family struggle, and the poison in it is still the poison of a sort of family argument. Family arguments are often nastier than other, but it's like this begins to use the language of John begins to use the language that is pretty poisonous. To be fair, Matthew does too. I mean, Matthew's pretty fierce, but Matthew is very clearly writing about his own brothers and sisters.
I see. It's so interesting. Yeah, Dvora, last question. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we say that original sin is that the human being is broken and has the possibility of sinning and being tainted, then if Jesus died on the cross to be a symbol for all the sins of humans, is that saying that the human is now no longer broken because Jesus has died on the cross? How do the two work together?
That would be, you've articulated one particular understanding of how salvation is supposed to work. Yes, that's one particular understanding. But
there still is the experience of brokenness in this world, Giles, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Like we still sin. Sin hasn't disappeared just because of this action. Like we're still tainted human beings.
Exactly right. Exactly. So yes, quite right. How does that work? How does it work? So in what sense are we saved if we look as ugly as we did before? Then exactly right. I mean, there is a plethora of answers to all these questions, which it seems 2 minutes is probably not the right.
So Giles, when will there be more people like you and all of my students who are talking about religion in the public sphere with these open minds? I mean, I wish I could say that Giles is just, there are 1,000 other people like Giles who could have spoken to us and told us these things, but I really think Giles' voice is really so specific to him, and it's such a unique voice we're hearing. He also has a book, which I'm mentioning not to plug his book because Israelis don't have the money. We just steal books off of the internet anyway. So he's got a book out called Chosen, which is about, I think, which I now understand so much better after hearing Giles talk about his theological perspective. The book Chosen is more about about that, but also about his life and memoir of really coming to terms with these two different traditions in his own life. And I think also we should say, Giles, it's good to have you here, not only to hear the model of the possible communication between different groups, but I think this is maybe even the more important thing, the prerequisite for it, is the way we can have conversations with ourselves. right? And not repress voices that we have inside of ourselves. That's very, very important, I think.
I want to show people, I can't even see myself really, but I would show people where I'm having this conversation. So I'm having this conversation with you in my church. I just sit next to it. And it's an extraordinary thing to have, have the pleasure to talk to people. I mean, I hate Zoom for the most part. I think it's a sort of diabolical load of old, but one lovely thing is to be able to have a conversation with people 5,000 miles away or whatever it is, from my church, across both time and religious divides and all of that sort of stuff. And it seems to me very important that we do that.
So Giles, from our church to your church, we say thank you. Let's take a few minutes break, guys, and we'll come back and just talk about the future a little bit. Reverend Fraser, thank you very much for joining us. This is just beyond my expectations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. Cheers, mate. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.